Do you want to make a lasting change in your life? Well, according to Amy Bucher, who is our guest here today, finding the right type of motivation, which she calls autonomous motivation, is crucial. With that, welcome to the School of Becoming, where we help you to go from paycheck to purpose. Today's guest is brought to you in collaboration with Manage Magazine. And we're very happy to have Amy here on the show today. Amy is the VP of Behavior Change Design at a design consultancy called Mad Pow. Further, she also has a Ph.D. in organizational psychology from the University of Michigan, which is also famous for her research on positive psychology. Moreover, Amy recently released her new book, which is called Engage, Designing for Behavior Change. So without further ado, here's Amy talking about how we can sustain our motivation in order to make lasting change in our lives.
I'm really excited to be here today. As Ingo mentioned, I recently published a book called Engage, Designing for Behavior Change. And it's really about this overlapping skill set that I have and that others have, where I'm a behavior scientist who works in the design world and really brings the lenses of motivation and behavior change to the design work that I do. So in the years that I've been doing this, I had looked for resources that I could recommend to people and share with people who were interested in a similar kind of career focus. And there weren't really that many. So I finally decided that maybe I should write it. And that's where Engaged came from. So there will be a promo code available for all of you who've registered for today's event. We'll be sending it out in the email when the recording comes out. But hopefully the book is something that offers some insight and useful tools to you in your own work. And the stuff that I'm going to talk about today is actually related to the content of the book. So as I mentioned, I wrote a book. It came out in March. I spent most of 2019 working on it. So most of my evenings and weekends were sitting at my dining room table with my laptop open, not doing my usual spending time with my friends or reading a novel for fun. I also had a landmark birthday at the end of 2019, and my husband and I typically like to take a trip to celebrate those sorts of life events. But given the focus on the book and trying to finish it up and knowing that it would be out in early 2020, we decided to postpone our trip. So we had planned to go to Peru. This photo is taken from Peru. It's called the Rainbow Mountain. And we were planning to go on a once-in-a-lifetime vacation in April 2020 to celebrate my birthday, the book coming out. We actually scheduled it to coincide with our wedding anniversary. So we're really bundling a lot of important life events into this trip. And, in general, I'm a person who loves to travel. It's really a place where I draw a lot of my inspiration from. I find that if I don't have my next trip scheduled, I don't quite feel like myself. It's really a big part of who I am to travel. So any typical time you would log into my airline site and you'd see that I have 5 or 6 upcoming trips, and they'd be a mix of work trips and fun trips. And I was looking forward to trips related to the book. But I think you probably all know what happened and how this ended up. So the coronavirus epidemic hit early this year. It really started to affect the US in early March, and we were still hopeful that we would get to go on this trip, but as time ticked on, we realized that that was not going to be what our April looked like. So instead, this is what my April looked like. This is my Google Maps timeline from April 2020, the entire month. You can get a sense of where I live from where the red dots are. And that one red dot that's a little bit distant is from my very exciting field trip one day to deliver a few items to friends, a specific set of friends who live about 2 miles away from me. This travel poster made me laugh, but also probably cry a little bit. Take a trip to your own bathroom. I had planned for something that I had really desperately been looking forward to. It had honestly sustained me through some of the hard parts of writing a book. I always struggle a little bit in the winter with the cold and the weather, and for me to have this trip to Peru to look forward to, it gave me a lot of strength. And so losing that was extremely disappointing. And I know in the universe of things that people have lost with this epidemic, it's not that important, but in my small world, it mattered a lot. And so I found myself struggling with motivation, which is where my professional training comes in. And one of the things I do want to point out here, and I hope will come across as I talk about this, is that motivation is not a one-time problem to solve. It truly is something that we work on as we continue to become ourselves. It's a process. And so I found that with everything going on with coronavirus and with the world around me changing in a way that the things that give me fuel were no longer available to me, I really had to turn inward and focus on that becoming in a deliberate way that I don't always have to do. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the psychology behind motivation, the process of finding your own motivation, and then that continual rewriting of your own story so that you can continue to find the motivation in the shifting challenges that life puts ahead of you. And what I would ultimately like to do is have you share some of your stories of what it's been like to become yourselves through this lens of motivation. So if you can, just while I'm talking, think about something that you either have wanted to do and really struggled to find the effort and dedication to put into it. You know, it's something that's always on your to-do list, but never on your being done list. I think we all have those things. Or maybe something that's similar to my story, where you really had something that was important to your life and now it's not possible and you've had to rethink the way that you approach your days. And at the end, those will be some of the basis of the discussion that we'll have. What I've learned, and this is both through my experience as a human being and my expertise as a behavior scientist, is that it's less about the plot than it is about the story. So in the case of me, I had a plot written where I was going to go on this trip to Peru and I was going to experience this list of wonderful places and things. I was going to do these events that otherwise would not have been part of my life. And that plot has been taken away from me. But what motivation is about, what I believe motivation is about, is finding a story that can sustain even when the plot changes. In order to do that, I turn to the self-determination theory of motivation. And one of the reasons that I use this theory, besides its power to explain the way that we orient ourselves to activity, is that it has such a rich evidence base. It has a global evidence base, and it really works to predict the conditions under which people can make lasting change and sustain that change. So I have a lot of confidence that using this framework to think about the things that are important to me can help provide me with that fuel for lasting change. So I mentioned to Ingo, I only have a few academic type slides. This is one of them. And this is a core idea at the center of self-determination theory of motivation. It's that motivation is less about high, low, or having a lot or a little, and it's more about the source of your motivation. It's called the motivational quality. So the title of the presentation today was Find Your Autonomous Motivation for Change That Lasts. And what you can see here, this is a continuum, and it goes in an order. So from less like worse types of motivation, less sustaining types of motivation, which we call controlled forms of motivation. They come from outside of yourself. They may be imposed on you by the world around you or by other people. And at the very lowest part of the spectrum, we have no motivation at all. This is someone who is not interested in engaging in a certain set of behaviors. And as a person who works in helping people change and sustain behaviors, I typically see this person and say, this is someone who's not ready. This is someone who we won't target with our change efforts at this time. And instead, we might just plant the seeds so that if something changes and they do generate an interest, they know that there are resources and support available. External and introjected forms of motivation are imposed from the outside. This is when somebody requires something of you, or when there's a penalty, or even a reward, which can feel like a positive thing. But if we're doing something for reasons outside of ourselves, what generally happens is that when that reason goes away, or when it becomes really difficult to do something, it's harder for us to maintain the behavior. We don't have our own personal reasons for doing it, and so it's far easier to let them go. And that's why these forms of autonomous motivation are really important for long-term change, because when it does get hard, and we know anyone who's ever tried to change or do a new behavior, but that is everybody, we know that it's really hard. And when it gets hard, we need to have something that's important and meaningful and personal that we can look to provide that guiding light. So that's why we're always looking for these autonomous forms of motivation. A lot of people have heard of intrinsic. It's when something is pleasurable for its own sake. But I want to hone in today on identified and integrated forms of motivation. So identified forms of motivation are when you're interested in doing something because it supports other goals you have. There's something that, I'll call a big G goal, a really important type of life goal. And doing these smaller behaviors are stepping stones to reaching it. That will keep people going. And then integrated motivation is when you do something because it's part of who you are. It aligns with your values and your sense of self. And so another thing that I'll talk about a little bit today is how to understand what your values and your sense of self are in a really explicit way that helps you ladder your behaviors onto them, so that when they become hard to sustain, you can look back to those values, to that sense of self, and remind yourself, this is why I'm doing it. This is why I'm putting in the effort. So the first piece is really about defining what your goals and your priorities are. And when we think about goals, I mentioned you can think about the big G goals, the top of the mountain here. What are the major life achievements that you hope to attain? But the reality is that day to day, we're not solely or even primarily focused on those big G goals. We have to do a lot of really mundane things to get, the activities of life done. And so those are important too. It's really about plotting a course up the mountain. So what I found helpful in my professional work, and again, bringing this over into my personal life, is I think about those big G goals, but then I also think about how do I consider which of my day-to-day goals are supportive of those sorts of things, which ones just kind of have to get done. A metaphor that I found helps a lot, and some of you may have heard this, is the idea of the glass jar, and you're given a set of rocks, smaller pebbles, and sand, and asked to fill the jar. And the trick is that if you start by filling the jar with the sand, with the smaller things, there won't be room at the end for the rocks. But if you do it the other way, if you put the rocks, the big things, which for the metaphor, those are the important things, the goals that you've prioritized, if you put those in the jar first, and then the pebbles, and then the sand, the smaller pieces fill in the cracks around the bigger ones. And in that way, you can fit more in the jar. So the challenge ahead of us is not just defining what we want to do, but figuring out which of those things are the stones, which are the pebbles, which are the sand, and attending to them in the right order. And I think one of the things that we're seeing now in our current situation is that it's not always constant which things in our lives are stones, pebbles, and sand. We are seeing now that people are put into economically precarious situations where suddenly some of those survival behaviors that normally we might not think about, they're just things that we have to get done. Suddenly those are becoming really important, and things that require focus, things that require effort, things that are part of a crisis moment. And so people are having to change the way that they approach their goals. So again, just in the spirit of this being the school of becoming, this is not about filling your jar one time and then leaving it and looking at it once in a while and thinking about how you're accomplishing your goals. It's also a constant balancing act of thinking about what do I value, what's important, and what is most important in this moment. And what I would encourage you to do, what the trick of all of this is to try to focus as much as possible on the stones, whatever those may be at a given point in time. And the tools to help you do that are really understanding your values and your sense of self, the why. Why do you want to do it? So I want to talk quickly about 4 different approaches that you can use to clarify this. And that may seem funny because I think we all have a sense of who we are, right? You've lived with yourself your entire life. You kind of know who you are as a person, but very few of us have taken the time to sit down and really think explicitly about what our values are, how we might express them. Who we are as a person if we had to distill ourselves down to our essence. It's a luxury to get to do that sort of self-reflection. And people are either too busy to do it or too stressed to do it, or they may not realize that there's a benefit in doing it. And so asking somebody to tell you what they value or who they are, it's not as easy as you might think. And I'll tell you that I personally have struggled a lot with this. Part of what I do as a professional is try to turn my tools inward on myself. And I know from personal experience that it is much easier said than done to understand what drives you. So I'm going to offer 4 tools or 4 sets of tools that you can use to do this. And I'm going to end with the one that's most effective for me personally and give you a little bit of insight about what I've learned from that and how I've used it to rewrite the story that surrounds my plot. So the first one is using universal values. There's a lot of research that shows that if you survey people around the world in different cultures, different circumstances about what's important to them, there's a limited list of answers that they will give. As human beings, there's a limited set of things that we care about. This particular set comes from the research of Schwartz. It's a fairly robust model. So there's 10 values here, and they fall into 4 categories. There are other models as well. James Clear, if you're familiar with his work on habit, has a nice list on his website. I've also seen much shorter lists that focus on things like family and community. What's important about them, though, is they provide you with a starting point. And a lot of my work is actually in designing digital products where I don't have the opportunity to speak one-on-one with somebody. I'm creating a product ahead of time that needs to be responsive to people. And so there's a little bit of prediction involved. I have to understand if I want to talk to people about what's important to them, I'll have to understand something about what that might be in order to offer them the right experience within the digital environment. And so these lists of universal values are really helpful to me as a digital product designer. But I think they're also helpful to people in general as you start to discover what's important to yourself. I find that when I read this list, some of these values, they resonate with me more than others. I have a sense just from looking at the list what type of person I might be versus what type of person I might not be. And one of the things to note about this too is there's no value judgment in this. All of these things, they are good things. You could be someone very different from someone else, and they are still value neutral in terms of being positive or negative types of people. So this is not about classifying yourself as good or bad. It's just understanding what is important to you so that then you can start to think about why you're doing the things you're doing. This next set of examples are a little bit more creative, and I will say they're inspired heavily by 2 things. So one of them is a company called the Human Performance Institute. I used to work for Johnson & Johnson. I was part of a company they acquired, and at the same time they acquired the Human Performance Institute. And part of what they do is they help people rewrite their life stories so that they can understand what's important to them and then direct their energy toward it. So some of these activities here are inspired by the work HPI does. It's also inspired by the work of Dr. Vic Strecker, who was the founder of the company I worked for that J&J acquired called Health Media. He's now the founder of a company called Kumanu, and his work is also very much centered on helping people find their purpose. And so between those 2 influences, I've had a lot of experience with being exposed to creative ways to tap into what really matters to you. And these are just a few. There's a long list of different ways that you can do this, but drawing your 100th birthday card. If you were turning 100 tomorrow, what would you want that birthday card that you received to say? There's going to be clues in there about what really matters to you because it tells you what you hope to have achieved by the end of, or not the end of your life, but your 100th year. On the darker side, create your epitaph. What would your gravestone say? And I actually find this one resonates a little bit better with me. I think maybe I have a bit of a dark spirit. I do sometimes find myself consciously reflecting on, oh, if this went into my obituary, how would I feel about that? So sometimes that's a good gauge for me to judge. Is this aligned with my values? Is this aligned with the type of person I want to be? Writing a love letter to your favorite thing. This is an activity that I use quite a bit in the research that I do in my job now, because it really helps me understand what it is about the world around them, about other people, about the systems and products that they use that resonates with people. And that tells me something about who they are and what they care about. And then lastly on this list here, really aligned with that HPI approach I mentioned, the Human Performance Institute, is writing 2 versions of your story. And you can actually think about doing this on a notebook with 2 facing pages where you journal your story as it is. What is the story you tell yourself today about your life? But then imagine if you could rewrite that story and it could be something different and better, what would it look like? And then the task ahead of you becomes plotting the map to get from the old story to the new story. So this is kind of the creative set of exercises that you can do. Another set of exercises, and this is also very inspired by Dr. Strecker, is playing self-detective, because one of the things that is really cool actually about human beings is even if we don't have the explicit insight into what we value and who we are, we do kind of know at a cellular level what's important to us. And so we make lots of small decisions over the course of a day or a week or a lifetime that reflect that out to the world. And so we can basically look at the clues that we've left ourselves, the breadcrumb trails that we've left in our environments, and use them to figure out, okay, what is it that really matters to me? So, what's your cell phone or computer desktop wallpaper? What did you choose to see every day that maybe makes you feel a little bit happy or calm? I have a screenshot here of my own phone. I took this yesterday, so this is what I have on here right now. This is my cat, Rex. He's 16. And, he's a big part of my world that makes me feel calm and centered and at home. And so I find that I reflexively reach for pictures of my pets on there. My desktop wallpaper on my computer is a beautiful shot of a lake in India that my husband took when we were on vacation. I mentioned my love of travel. So again, that's reflecting something. What you have displayed in your workspace, what you keep in your wallet or close at hand. We build environments for ourselves that support the type of people we are. And so if you're searching for a way to articulate that and understand it, you can look at the world around you that you have built and see what breadcrumbs you've left for yourself. And then the last one I want to talk about is one that works really well for me. And this actually, I'm glad that Ingo mentioned Marty Seligman. So Marty Seligman and then Chris Peterson, the late Chris Peterson, who was one of my mentors when I was at University of Michigan, were both fathers of positive psychology, and they worked together on the Values in Action Survey. So it's a large-scale research effort to uncover common character strengths. And they found that there are about 24 character strengths that are common. And they built this Values in Action Survey, which is free to take. So you can, if you Google it, you can go to the website for the Institute on Character and take the survey there, or it's built into tools like Happify. So that's what the screenshot on the right is like. And what it does is it leads you through a series of questions that are, I don't find particularly challenging to answer. And at the end, it tells you, out of these 24 strengths, which ones are your top strengths? The idea is that you want to identify the positives in yourself, the things that you're good at, the things that you value, and then you can use them to build upon. And so the Institute on Character website also has all kinds of great exercises, some free, some for subscription, where you can use the character strengths that you have and figure out how to weave them into your life to become happier and more successful and achieve your goals. And I wanted to end with this one for two reasons. One, it works particularly well for me, but two, this Happify screenshot here shows my results. So I've taken it on the website, I've taken it on Happify, and a consistent thing in my results is that this love of learning is always high for me, as is curiosity. And I mentioned as well that motivation is not one and done. It's not set it and forget it. It's constantly returning to the story and figuring out how can I use it to support the plot that I'm currently living in. And so for me, with this moment in time, with the things that I've been unable to do, I've turned back to these results and thought, okay, I have a love of learning. I have curiosity. How can I use them to tell my new story? The story that does not involve me walking up Rainbow Mountain. And I will say, when I get those results, one of the things that resonates so deeply with me about it is I do think that's why I love travel so much and why I draw so much happiness and peace from it, because I'm always learning when I'm traveling to new places. I'm meeting new people, I'm tasting new foods, I'm seeing ways of life that are different from my own. I didn't know before I started planning this trip that a place like this exists in the world, like this beautiful rainbow mountain. It's called Rainbow Mountain, but it's obviously called that because it looks like a rainbow. I had no idea. And so, travel really clicks into that value that I have in the particular way that I plan it and experience it. But since my world is constrained, how can I exercise that in my current reality? And so these are some of my pandemic photos, and they may seem mundane, but let me tell you why they express something important to me. And it's because each one of these represents something that I've made a deliberate effort to learn or experience in a new way in this world. So I love to bake, but I've always been intimidated by yeast, and I decided it's time to get over it. And now I can make beautiful yeast breads that are very delicious and, probably not the most dietarily healthy choice for me, but it gives me a lot of pleasure to do that learning. Under normal circumstances, I love to meet my friends in a summer evening to have some oysters and a cocktail at the bar, and I can't do that now, so I've learned to shuck oysters and make my own Mai Tais. And similarly, I spent a day making nachos from scratch. So all the ingredients, I pickled my own jalapenos. It's not the same, but it's a different way to experience it and feel a tap into my values. Several of the photos at the bottom, including the selfie there, I run as a hobby, and I've gotten into the habit of running in places that are beautiful and peaceful that I like, but they're crowded and they're not as safe to run in right now. And so I've made a deliberate effort to think of my runs as explorations. I am deliberately going to parts of my community that I don't normally go to and trying to understand what else is out there. Those three photos are actually all of really pretty places. I've also found some places I will not choose to add to my running route, but it's all in the spirit of exploration, and continually reminding myself of that helps make my story fit for me. And then the last photo here, it's also affected my professional life. I normally travel quite a bit for work. I do a lot of face-to-face research with people, and that's just not safe right now. So I've had to think about, how do I pivot my research practice? How do we change our methods so that we can continue to connect with people, get insights about their experience, but not put them or ourselves in danger? And so again, really putting that framework around it of learning has helped me tap into that autonomous motivation rather than feeling like it's a pure sacrifice. It's an opportunity. I don't want to pretend that this is a magic bullet. This is a really hard time, and I am struggling with it as much as anyone. Maybe not as much as anybody, but I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's not an effort, but this exercise of reconnecting on a continuous basis with my autonomous motivation has helped sustain me in this time. And I think that there is a lot of value there to others as well, to connect with what matters to you in order to tell that story. And so this is where I wanted to leave off. I will just briefly say, this is the book. It's available paperback and several different e-reader versions from either Rosenfeld Media or Amazon. And as I mentioned, there will be a promo code coming for all of you for purchasing from Rosenfeld. So just put that out there before. I wanted to solicit from you all some of, what's your why? What are the stories that you have had to let go of? And what are some of the underlying values and sense of self that you're able to use to rewrite the story so that you can continue to live your life in a way that feels meaningful to you, even when the world around you changes? Yeah, I would specifically recommend taking it on the Values in Action Institute website, because they do offer a number of free tools that help with that step. And I spent some time on it this week in preparing for this talk, and they've added some resources that are specifically for the coronavirus time period when people's options are, necessarily limited. So I would say, when you take the survey, spend some time looking at the tools that they offer on that website. But then also think about the things that you love to do. Like when you're at your happiest, when you lose sense of time, what are you doing? And then how does that connect to whatever your survey results are? Because I found that that particular step is really helpful for me. I use the travel example. It's not just, for me, it's not really so much about the trip as it is about this chance to experience the world and experience something new. And so having that insight lets me turn it to other activities that are accessible to me right now.
And so, Amy, the way I understood this is that travel is just one expression of you. It's just like, and like realizing that and knowing that you can express it elsewhere is that what you meant when you said, like, oh, I found all these experiences that actually do something similar here?
Yeah. And again, I don't want to pretend that it's a complete substitute, because the experience of going around my neighborhood on foot is not going to yield quite as much to learn as the experience of going to a country I haven't visited before. But I find I can scratch that itch a little bit. I can get at that same need that is driving my desire to travel. So it's a substitute for sure, but it is better than nothing.
And I just want to come back to one of your examples, because you had this example about running, and we have Melissa here sharing that she typically struggles with exercising and reading, which has only become worse during the pandemic, even though I thought I'd be more motivated to do those things now with more free time. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested to hear a little bit about what's making them hard now. I will say I found that so I'm also a big reader, ties into that love of learning. It's another way for me to experience worlds outside of my own. And I found I was struggling with it a lot at the beginning of the pandemic as well, because I was so anxious. So it was really difficult for me to put this type of focus that I normally do into that. I experimented a little bit, and what I found I need to do is read really trashy fiction. Like, I need to read things that are low stress, like just for fun. So I had to find a different version of that activity. And similarly, actually, I also did struggle with the exercise until I came up with this idea of, okay, how do I use it as an adventure? How do I make myself feel like I'm not just going out there for the fitness? Thank you for your comment. So one of the things I didn't touch on, just to try to keep things fairly simple, is that actually at any given moment in time, we're usually motivated by more than one thing at the same time. So it's really common that we might, like, for example, work. I love my job and I really find it fulfilling, but I probably wouldn't do it if I didn't get a paycheck. So I'm doing it for at least two different reasons. And I think similarly, when you're talking about getting started with a behavior, sometimes it's helpful to lean on some of those controlled forms of motivation, the rewards, the expectations, to get started. I don't advocate relying on them forever, for always, and by themselves. But if you can create something that makes you feel obligated to get started, get an accountability buddy who is looking to see that you're going to go on that run or do that workout. Or you see there's a program called Stick, for example, where you bet money and you say, if I don't do the thing I said I'm going to do, my money will be given to a charity. Or you can even pick an anti-charity, like a charity that you don't support, so that then the money is going to the bad guys. Those sorts of things can be really helpful to get started. The trick is, at some point you need to try to find those more sustainable reasons, the internal reasons. And so with I do a lot of work with exercise just because it's indicated for so many health conditions, and that's where a lot of my work is. And what we find with exercise is that for most people, it's really unpleasant to get started. Your body's not used to it. It can be physically painful. You're probably not very good at it, so it's like mentally and emotionally painful. But there is a point, if you're consistent, where your body adjusts, and you might start to find that it feels physically good. You might find that you feel more energetic when you're done, and so forth and so on. And so trying to pay attention to that transition when all of a sudden there are these reasons that are a little bit more internal, a little bit more personal, that seems to be where the magic happens. Yeah, I have actually. I've used them quite a bit on various projects that I've worked on over my career. And I kind of use them in two big buckets of ways. So one is I do a lot of research, especially in the formative stages of a project. And so I will often structure my moderator guide to probe in on people's values, and I will use those universal values as a starting point because they're pretty well supported by research. So I have an expectation that something on that list will work for most people that I talk to. And then I'm able to get down to a deeper level of detail for the population that we're designing for and the problem area that we're designing in. And then the second place where I've used it, I mentioned I used to work for a company called Health Media that was acquired by Johnson & Johnson. We built digital health coaching platforms. So we were able to take in information about a user, and we constructed algorithms that would then generate personalized coaching content. And our technology, this was a while ago, our technology was pretty limited to multiple choice type of answers from people. We weren't really able to do a lot with free-form text. And so when we were constructing our programs, and we had a lot of them. So I've used this across multiple different health conditions and focus areas and concerns. We would basically take our list of core values. We would do a little bit of research to refine it and make it appropriate for that particular area. And then we would use it as a multiple choice question where we would say, which of the things on this list most represent what's important to you? And then with our algorithm, we would produce on the other end of it personalized content that would say, like, all right, it sounds like family is really important to you. Let's talk about the various ways that sleeping better could help you be a better family member. And then we could actually generate that context or that framing around a lot of the information that we were giving. And so what was kind of cool about it is that the core information didn't necessarily change. If you take something like improving your sleep, there's pretty much like a prescribed protocol that you would follow, but we would give the differing context and rationale for it based on what was important to people. And we did have results that indicated that was very helpful at getting people to be interested in and make the changes.
Interesting. So it remembers me a little bit of your story in the beginning where you showed that picture, right? And like, it's super beautiful picture. And I was thinking, like, yeah, some people might just be motivated not by learning, but just by the beauty of that scenery, right? And so it's really interesting how different people relate to the same thing, the same action, the same activity, as you just pointed out, in different ways. And sometimes our jobs as like designers, for example, in this case, is to help them to get to the right perspective.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I see people struggle with, I had to let go of this a little bit myself, is that as designers, we actually don't even really need to understand necessarily why a person connects with something if we can give them the tools to make that connection themselves. So like I work as a consultant now with clients, and when we talk about how do we understand people's values and how do we get them to think about that and make these connections, oftentimes clients will say, well, I'd really like to collect that data. I'd like to have them talk to us about what they value. And there may be technological reasons or regulatory reasons why that's hard to do. It doesn't matter for us. We don't need that data if we can give people the tools to do the reflection on their own. I saw a joke online that it was like, pretend to be a therapist can't both be true. And if you've ever been to therapy, I've found that that's my experience is therapists often saying like, okay, can't both be true. I think that's what you're getting at a little bit, where you make one decision, but there are other decisions that could also benefit you, and you're just not able to see it in the moment. I think that's also part of why finding your motivation is a lifetime's work. It's not something that's ever done. Your values probably aren't going to shift tremendously over the course of a lifetime, but understanding them isn't easy. And there's that constant action of trying to reattach them to whatever the world around you demands at a given point in time. So yeah, I hear you. I know it's hard, and I'm kind of, I mean, I guess I'm not amazed, but when I was younger, I thought I would reach a point where I would kind of be done, right? I've done all this work. I've become who I am, and it hasn't happened yet. Not even close.
I think that's something that we all hope for. And Amy, thank you so much for underlying the importance of values and discovering those.
Actually, another concept from the Human Performance Institute that's really stuck with me is this idea of periodicity, right? And this, it's not unique to Human Performance Institute. You actually see this with anything like muscle development or stress management. Human beings go through cycles. So we can go through a strengthening cycle, for example, if you're weightlifting, but then you need the recovery cycle in order to actually consolidate those gains. And I think it's the same way with some of these motivational things. At least I tell myself that, where you can be very motivated and really working hard at something for a period of time, but then whether it's you have a setback or you just reach a natural conclusion point, it could be a success, it could be a happy ending, but it takes a lot. And sometimes we do need to take some time to recover and withdraw a little bit from the effort. And I think that's very normal and healthy. And the trick is just to think of it as a cycle and not as a permanent end to the striving and the work. So, I'm sorry to hear that happened. I will also say I graduated college in 2001. So my third day of grad school was September 11th. And I saw a lot of I felt very lucky that I had gone to grad school because I had the security of knowing that my program was still there. A lot of my friends who graduated with me either struggled to get jobs in the first place because there was also an economic downturn in the month leading up to 9/11, or lost their jobs in the aftermath. And so I feel like my adult life has been marked by seeing some of these really severe just economic blows, and watching people have to go through this cycle of starting over. So I'm really sorry to hear that it's happening again. It's hard to see this happening, but I will say, there is hope. It may not feel like it's nearby, but I can tell you a lot of the people who I went to school with who were in a position similar to yours back in 2001 have gone on to have really fulfilling careers that they're happy with, and I'm confident the same will happen for you. Yeah, I'm speaking purely from kind of a motivational, psychological perspective. Yes, I don't know what's best in terms of actually achieving the results you want with a job search, but
Mhm.
I think in terms of the human spirit and our capacity to engage in this kind of effort, it's absolutely necessary to have breaks for yourself, to be kind to yourself, to take the time to recover when you've gone through something that is difficult like this. Yeah, well, first of all, welcome to the Imposter Syndrome Club. um, it's so common, and I definitely suffer from it myself. I'm trying not to express that as much in. I'm doing it on purpose here, but I've found that I have a tendency to self-deprecate sometimes due to that imposter syndrome, and I'm working on not doing it. One of the things that I have learned and I'm trying to pay attention to is how common it is, and especially among women. So I think that in safe spaces, it is helpful to talk about it. And I would, encourage you to, I have found it is helpful for me, for example, to try to accept a compliment, which is really hard because my instinct is always say, oh, no, it was an accident that I did the good thing, or there's some reason you don't know about why it, really isn't a good thing. But I promise you, your imposter syndrome is telling you lies about yourself. You are better than you think you are, and other people can see that. So if you want to talk a little bit about the transition, I've been in the design world ever since I finished my PhD, but I also had to go through kind of a difficult transition to switch from the academic world into the corporate design world. So I'm happy to just chat if that's something you're interested in, and if it would be helpful to you. And if not, that's fine too. And I think, Ingo, you touched on it a little bit, which is if you can take small steps into new areas, that can be a helpful way to test out, whether it's the sort of thing where you need a rest and maybe you will get back into something that looks like what your motivation used to be, or maybe you do need a change in direction. So I've experienced burnout at a few points now in my career. I think it's something that happens in the corporate world that we've set up, and with ambitious, motivated people. And I've found that there have been times where I just need a rest and I'm able to come back at some point. And there are times where it's my body and my brain telling me that there's something about this situation that isn't right for me. And so it's dipping my toe in the new water has been what's been helpful to me, because it's not as scary as fully committing to a change. But it helps give me that direction. And I have become a person who believes in listening to your body a bit about this as well. I find that if I am more attuned to symptoms of anxiety in myself, I'm better able to say, like, no, this isn't the right course for me. My body's telling me, like, I'm experiencing too much anxiety for this to be the right course for me. And it's not that typical nervousness because it's new or unfamiliar. It's like dread. It's taken some work to see the difference between the two. And I will actually say I've worked with a professional therapist who's been extremely helpful to me in understanding the different types of signals that my body gives and how to interpret them. So that's been something that I've used. Yeah, I've struggled with that too. I will say one of my regrets in life is that in college I had the opportunity to study abroad. It's very privileged thing here, but for a lower cost than I could live abroad at any other point in my life. And I didn't do it because of fear of missing out. I was worried about, what if I leave my friends and I'm off campus and they're all going to have so much fun. And I look back now and I think, fool. You had the chance to go immerse in a new culture and like have this once in a lifetime experience, and you were focused on you had the fear of missing out on the wrong thing. I think of that sometimes when there is a new opportunity ahead of me and it would take me away from the familiar thing. I sometimes think, remember what happened when you focused your FOMO in the wrong place, and that has helped me. Um, and I think some of it too is just working with the uncomfortable truth that none of us can do it all. We are all going to miss out on some stuff. And so again, it's getting back to the idea of, what are your priorities? What are your values? And what are the things that really, are can't misses for you based on that? And what are the things where you may have regrets, you may be sad you couldn't be there, but they're not going to haunt you on your deathbed quite the same way. So it's not easy, but that's where the work is. I do not know. That's a really interesting question. I mentioned Chris Peterson, who's one of the creators of it, was one of my mentors in grad school. And I know from talking to him and from what he's published about it, that they felt that focusing on what is already positive about yourself was a way to build strength and resilience. And that was kind of their goal for the whole tool, is consistent with the nature of positive psychology, I guess. So it's a different lens. I personally like the idea of working on the places where you're perhaps weaker or not as strong. But it's not really the way the tool is developed, so I haven't thought about it that way. That's a really interesting perspective.
And thanks for sharing that, Amy. One thing that I heard about the tool is that, or positive psychology in general, is that weaknesses are unrealized strength. But
Mm-hmm.
I think the challenge with it is that we have put the strength are our strength because we have invested so much lifetime into them, making them our strength, that like the things that are lower on the list, they just simply haven't gotten at as much time. So like investing some time into them might lead to great results, but it's also quite challenging because you might measure like them at the same level that you measure just when you play to your strength. And so like allowing yourself to really be a learner when it comes to that, I think might be a helpful thing. Talking about learning, Amy, thank you so much for spending this hour with us. I learned a lot. I took a lot away from you, from this conversation. And also thank you for sharing so much of your personal stories and gave us a couple of insights on how what's talked about today can be applied in our lives. I hope you all see a couple of people applaud. And there's also a lot of like, you are great, Amy, in the chat. Please read it. Please say, please enjoy it. Also, thank you so much from my side to all of you who joined here today. Took this hour out of your day, and I hope you find it beneficial to you. Amy, thank you so much for today.
Yeah, thank you all. I really appreciate all the great conversation, and I feel like we've all been a little bit vulnerable, and I really appreciate that.